Right, today we're going to be looking at how we use Pythagoras theorem, and I'm going to show you two different examples because there's two slightly different ways of using it. So the first one will be calculating the hypotenuse, and the second one will be calculating a shorter side. It's really important that we remember what the hypotenuse is. The hypotenuse is the longest side of a right-angled triangle. Remember, Pythagoras theorem will help you calculate the length of one side of a right-angled triangle if you know the other two. So we're going to start with this one, calculating the hypotenuse. I know one side is 5 centimeters. I know the other side is 8 centimeters, but the hypotenuse is unknown, labeled here as x. So I'm going to label this triangle A and B, the two shorter sides, and C for the hypotenuse. Pythagoras theorem itself states that a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and we're going to use that to calculate the value of x. So I'm going to substitute these values in. A is 5, so that's 5 squared, b is 8, and c is the hypotenuse, which so far we only know as x. Working out the squares, 5 squared is 25, 8 squared is 64. Add those two together, that becomes 89 equals x squared. To find out what x is, I have to then square root 89. This is not a square number, so we need a calculator to do this. And it turns out that x is 9.43 centimeters, and I've rounded that to 2 decimal places. So that's calculating the hypotenuse. The second example is slightly different because if you look carefully, we already know the hypotenuse is 10. We know one of the shorter sides is 7. It's the other short side that is unknown, in this case labelled y. So I use the same labelling system as before. I call the shorter sides A and B, either way around, and I'm going to call the hypotenuse C. Even though I'm calculating a shorter side, it's a slightly different style of question, I still use the same Pythagoras theorem. A squared plus b squared is c squared. And the process is very similar. So I substitute in what I know. Y squared plus 7 squared equals 10 squared. That's substituting the b for the 7 and the c for the 10. Work out the squares. 49, 10 squared is 100. This is where it's slightly different. We have to do a rearrangement. So we rearrange this formula. So instead of y squared plus 49 equals 100, to calculate y squared, we have to subtract this 49 away from the 100. So we get y squared equals 51. Need our calculator to work out the square root of 51, which is 7.14 centimeters. Once again, rounding that to 2 decimal places. You can check that this makes sense now because the side I found, y, should be shorter than the hypotenuse. The hypotenuse must be the longest side. The hypotenuse is 10. My value for y is 7.14, so that would fit.